Who do you expect to go back to work today?
Well, we're saying in relation to the existing guidelines that if you can work from home, you still should. But for those who can't work from home, thinking particularly the construction, the manufacturing sectors, we are encouraging them to go back to work actively now. That won't start until Wednesday, so there'll be guidance out. We've been working with the employers to make sure it can be done in a safe way. And this is the first step in the roadmap over the next weeks ahead as we transition out from the current restrictions and we protect life, but we also protect people's livelihoods and get back as close as we reasonably responsibly can to our way of life. So it's the first step. We'll proceed with maximum conditions, maximum monitoring, but I think it's right and we can do so in a sure-footed way.
Okay, construction workers, who else?
Well, this is in relation to those who can't stay at home and do their job. So construction is the really important sector, manufacturing. We're going to set out the full list at 2 o'clock. This afternoon with a 50-page document. There'll be further guidance for employers around that. So it's really talking about those who, if you can still work from home, that is the thing that we are advising you to do. But of course, there are large sectors of the economy which just can't operate that way. And so having worked with employers, having worked with those businesses to make sure that safe and secure, COVID-secure settings can be provided for people, we're saying that actually from Wednesday they should go back to work.
What about people like hairdressers? Can't tell you how many people have been asking me about hairdressers. What do they need to do? They can't work from home, can they?
No, absolutely not. And we will, as I said, this is the first step on Wednesday. There are 3 steps. So from the earliest 1st of June, we'll look at non-essential retail and how they can go back, only if the conditions are met, subject to wider monitoring, so that we only proceed in sure-footed way. And then from the 4th of July, at the earliest, subject to the conditions, we'll look at other sectors, and that will include hospitality, but it will also include personal care and people like hairdressers. And obviously, the proximity in those 2 sectors that I've mentioned, hospitality and personal care sector like hairdressers, is something where we just don't think we're ready yet, given where we are with the virus. So we've got very clear guidance that will be coming out to give people the information that they need. But as I said, our overriding goal is to make sure we protect people's health. We don't see the virus get out of control. That's why we need to stay alert. But we also start to protect livelihoods and preserve our way of life as best we can in these circumstances.
Okay, so they're going to have to wait until Independence Day to potentially get back to work, hairdressers, hospitality and the like. Does that mean pubs as well? Does that mean pubs and restaurants will start to reopen in July? Because if they don't, that sector potentially is going under.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So there's 3 steps. There's the modest changes we're announcing, which will take effect from Wednesday. There's the other changes for things like non-essential retail and people going back to school, particularly primary school, which won't start until the earliest on the 1st of June, subject to conditions. And then starting from the 4th of July at the very earliest, those other sectors where they're just inherently more difficult because people are mixing together and it's difficult to maintain the social distancing, we wouldn't be able to say, based on the advice we get and the monitoring we do, that we would start them at least until the 4th of July. But we do want to give people the signal, businesses, but also the public sector, so that we can plan and have a plan and have guidance and start to prepare for if that's possible. And at every step along the way, as we said, we've got to stay alert, we've got to monitor very carefully the progress we've made with the virus, we've got to keep getting it down, both the overall prevalence but also the transmission rate, and then we'll see where we get to. But I do think it's important to have a roadmap along the way.
Yeah, but just drilling down on that, are you suggesting that pubs potentially and restaurants could start to reopen on the 4th of July?
So the full detail will be set out in this 50-page document. It's out at 2 o'clock this afternoon. But what we're saying is those wouldn't even be considered until step 3, which would be at the very earliest 4th of June, subject to all the conditions that I've mentioned about making sure the virus is under control and making sure that any new sectors at that point that are open could be done in a COVID-secure way, which is why we're saying we've got to stay alert, control this virus as we start to get back to something resembling normal. But that's the, if you like, the milestone that we've set for consideration of things like pubs and restaurants.
Okay, out in the park, you can go out in the park and you can sit as long as you're socially distancing from one other person in the park. But what about in the garden? Can you have somebody round? Another question that I was asked overnight. Can you have somebody who isn't part of your household round in your garden as long as you're sitting 2 metres away from them?
Well, the full detail in it will be set out in the guidance at 2 o'clock. But effectively, what we're saying.
Seen it.
Yes, but I have seen it. But effectively, what we're saying is that if you can stay 2 metres apart, as is already the case, for example, with shopping deliveries or support for the vulnerable, if you can stay 2 metres apart, then we'll encourage people to use their common sense. But we do need to maintain that social distancing. If not, and people have been exceptional so far. The overwhelming majority of people have followed the guidance, the guidelines. That's why we've got the level of this virus down to the stage we've got it at now. And if we stay alert and we keep that social distancing that I mentioned, whatever the setting it may be, we can keep making progress and get more of the things back to normal that people would like, whether it's schools, whether it's business, whether it's socialising. But we must maintain the 2 metres apart.
Okay, you understand why that's important, though, don't you, Mr. Raab? A lot of people have been apart from their older relatives for many, many weeks now, and they want to be able to go around and sit in the garden with them. Stephen Kinnock previously was spoken to by police for doing that. You're saying that's no longer. People can now potentially do that.
Well, no, let me be clear about that. And I know exactly what you mean. My mum's birthday was over the weekend. It's difficult, I know, for families up and down the country. What we've asked the scientists to look at whether there could be some limited contact between, say, 2 different households within the same family, is the example you've given. And we've asked them to give us some advice on what that would do to the transmission rate. So until we've got that advice back, we're not in a position to say, yes, you can positively do that. But it is something we want to look at, because for all the reasons that you expressed, Kay, we can see why people want to be more in touch with their close family.
Many happy returns to your mum. When will it be safe to travel on public transport again?
Well, we're going to set out the guidance on that on Tuesday. We're working very closely with both, for example, in London TfL and all of the other operators. But we're saying at the moment, please do avoid. We recognise that, for example, if people are going back to work, construction and manufacturing, where we've said that if you can't work from home, go back to work, we recognise that there will be people that want to. We're saying wherever possible, either go by car, cycling or walking if you possibly can. And we're making arrangements in relation to public transport for those that literally can't. So we still want to keep people off public transport at this stage, because of course there's a greater risk of that mixing and avoiding the social distancing. But we'll set out clear guidance on Tuesday in relation to public transport.
And if you have to go by public transport, you need to wear a face mask, gloves, etc. Where do you get them from?
So just on face coverings, and that's distinct from the kind of face mask, clinical grade that you would expect in either the NHS or care homes, there's limited evidence on their value. But one thing they can do in settings where you can't be guaranteed that you'll be socially distanced, they can stop you passing on to other people. So that's something which, in relation to public transport, is something that we'll give advice on shortly about how that can be done. But it's not as I said, it's not a clinical grade mask. It will be the kind of face covering that you could prepare and make at home. And again, as
so
let's be clear. Well, or
I could wear a scarf. I mean, I've seen the Marines on YouTube showing me how to make a mask. I saw Prince Harry wandering out and about in LA with just a scarf over his face. That sort of DIY face covering would be sufficient, would it?
Yes, I mean, let's be clear about the limits of it. It has a limited effect in terms of stopping other people from receiving the virus from someone that wears the covering. It's not going to provide any additional protection for the person wearing it, but in areas where you just can't be sure that you might not run into people that you don't know, or that you find yourself in more enclosed spaces than you would otherwise want to be in, given the social distancing rules, it just provides an extra mitigation. So we will be giving advice on that on Tuesday, and further detail on that in the 50-page document that will be out today.
Okay, 2 final quick questions. This has been very enlightening for us, Secretary. Thank you. Schools, back on the 1st of June for the first tranche, the older ones potentially not back till September. Is that what I was picking up from the Prime Minister yesterday?
Yes, so from the 1st of June, that's the earliest that we would start saying to reception children in primary schools, year 1 and year 6, and all, to go back, but only if the conditions are satisfied, if it's both safe in terms of the progress we're making with the virus, but also that the social distancing measures can be put in place in schools. We're also saying, because we know that there'll be youngsters in secondary schools who've got GCSEs or A-levels next year, those that face exams next year, we'd want to make sure they have some access to their teachers before they go away for the summer term. Our ambition is to get all primary school children back into school within a month of the end of the summer term. But again, as I said all along, only if these conditions can be satisfied so that we can proceed on a sure-footed, safe way, responsible way. But we recognise that's important for young people's education, but also for people who want to go back to work. So that wouldn't happen until at the very earliest the 1st of June.
Okay, and as far as airports are concerned, it looks as though with this 14-day quarantine that it looks as though you're likely to introduce that you are torpedoing the summer holiday industry under the waterline.
Well, look, the reality is we've been looking at border restrictions at airports and ports for some time. I've consistently asked the question, is this an effective measure that we should be taking? The answer's come back, no, not while the virus is transmitting at the rate inside the UK that it is. But now we've got it down, there is a risk that people that come in from abroad who may not appear to have the symptoms but are carrying the virus could then revive the virus in the UK. So we're not doing it immediately. We'll work towards the end of the month to put this in place. But what we will do, which is, I think it's over 90 countries have already done this, and there are different steps along the way. So we've always said we'll take the right decision at the right moment in time. But we are saying that people that come into this country from that point would need to go into isolation for 14 days. And that just stops, as we bring the virus down, it stops it resurging. And we'll talk to our international partners and make sure international freight can keep coming. We'll make sure that there are certain exceptions. For example, in Northern Ireland, the common travel area will be retained. We'll speak to the French. The Prime Minister has already spoken to President Macron to make sure there are common sense measures across the short straits. So we'll do it in a practical way, but it gives us an extra check, an extra precaution, so that we don't see the virus as it comes down start to pick up again because of asymptomatic people who are not showing the symptoms coming in from abroad.
Okay, why didn't we do this ages ago?
Because, as I said, the science was that when the level of the virus, both the prevalence, the amount of it, but also the rate of transmission, was within the UK very high, it made no difference, or negligible difference, what restrictions we put at the border. But as the virus comes down, the risk that it could suddenly pick up again because of people carrying the virus who may not be aware of it, coming into the UK and spreading it. So that's the reality. And as we've said all along, we'll be guided by the scientific advice and we'll take the measures at the right moment in time. And the key thing is, as we go through the phases and the roadmap, we need to protect life. We need to make sure that public health is the #1 priority. But we also need to protect people's livelihoods and get life back to somewhere resembling normal. And for that reason, we need to stay alert so that we control the virus as we start to allow people to do more of the things that they would want to do, and as we proceed safely and securely into the second phase.